Hey everyone, I'm Brian Michael with Kenny's Cooks, and today we're going to walk you through how to make a perfectly smoked brisket at home. Now, we're going to go through how to trim it, how to season it, and then how to make Texans mad at us for deviating from their script. And then we're going to walk you through how to make one of our best-selling pop-up menu items, which is a barbecue smothered brisket burrito. Now, before we jump into everything, if you do go through the video and you find yourself liking what we do, you think we're funny, or you'd like to help us reach our actual goal and dream of someday being able to do this full time, you can drop us a like, leave us a comment, hit that subscribe button, and if you're really feeling generous, go ahead and share the video with your friends and family. We really appreciate it. Now let's get into this thing.
So to get started, we're going to lay down a damp towel. We used a side towel, you can use paper towels. This is going to help keep the board in place and not shuffle around, slide around. Keep it nice and safe. Then obviously we would need the cutting board to go next, because what else is that thing going to hold in place? Give it a couple of really stiff movements. Our pride and joy, the brisket. So here what we're seeing is this area that kind of looks pretty gray in comparison to everything else. This happens during the sealing process of it. I'm pretty sure it's just a result of the bandsaw hitting certain parts of the cow, and the heat of the bandsaw kind of like cooks a superficial layer of it, and then when it gets vacuum sealed, it really takes on that gross gray color. We're gonna trim all of this, and then we're gonna flip around to the other side. This guy's probably gonna have to get trimmed up a little bit.
And what we're looking to do in trimming this is we're just going to try to square off the brisket so that we get all the hanging piece of that beef off, and then trying to keep it almost in that rectangular shape that you're used to seeing with the flat.
So now let's take a closer look that we have it. You can see the hard separation now between the point and the flat, and it runs along this fat cap here, the decal. So the decal is what's going to be your separation point, and even though it has a really silly name, it's important to identify where the decal is so that we can make our separation later. So we're going to come in with the chef's knife, and we're just going to chip away at this little by little. Actually, it would probably be easier if we give it the flip and address that gray stuff from earlier. We're going to shave a little bit off of this without getting too deep into the meat, because we just want to get rid of that gray stuff. Yeah, there we go. I could probably be a little closer to the edge even. Yeah.
And then we're going to keep following it down the side of the brisket there until all that gray meat is gone. And once all that awful textured gray stuff is gone, we can then flip the brisket back over and then focus on cleaning up the bottom any which way we need to.
So this stuff down here, we can probably chip away at if we're being really picky. Like that stuff, you can just kind of really lightly with your knife, the way it works is you want to angle it kind of upwards a little bit so that when you're in there actually trimming, you're never digging into the meat. And that way you're only really grabbing off that top layer, so there's no big deep cuts inside of the actual flat of the brisket. Because you don't want to damage the integrity of the brisket, right? You want it to be whole, you want it to be beautiful, and you want to be able to cut into it later, try to get the flop. Whether or not we do is to be determined. So we're still learning ourselves. So let's see. This guy I'm probably just gonna trim just little by little, because this is a huge fat piece right on the top here.
And in order to trim him off, we're just going to use the tip of our knife and go little by little, nice and gently. That way we don't have to worry about making any long, broad strokes, which could potentially damage the flat or the bottom side of the brisket there. Then to continue the trimming process, we're actually just going to start flipping this thing around, and we're going to start taking off any hard fat that we can see, feel, or find, just because it's not all going to render during the cooking process, and we're not trying to have massive pieces of fat in every bite, or every other bite, or just in certain parts. It's not an enjoyable eating experience for us. If you are in the camp that enjoys that, by all means, hey, you're cooking your own brisket, not my brisket. So just go ahead and leave it on and enjoy it, you know? To each their own. But I digress. And then we're going to actually get back into the belly of it, and then we're going to trim up a little bit more of those deposits of fat on the surface. You don't have to go too crazy with this, but if something looks like silver skin, just get it the heck out of there.
Again, just working slowly. We're gonna use more of the top half of the knife here. And we're just gonna try to get in to assess the situation, see what's good, because we don't want any of this fat.
And then again, working inside of the top part of our knife there, towards the tip, we're just gonna start chipping away at the decal, that fat cap in between the point and the flat. And just because if there's too much in there, we're never gonna render it all out.
Patience is heavily rewarded in brisket, or just I guess barbecue in general, right? A lot of people are compelled to do the hurry up and then wait thing, but the more attention you pay to this thing now and the more care you give it now, the better your final product's going to be every time. And that kind of just goes for everything, whether it be in the kitchen or in real life. Patience is almost always rewarded. Remember that. I guess real talk with Uncle Mama.
Dang. That was deep, dude. Now that deep insight, Brian, is done rambling, we're just going to go back to trimming away at the decal. As we go through this trimming process, what we're actually looking for is about 1/4 inch of fat across the entire length of the brisket. This is going to do a lot of things for us, including keeping it nice and moist and juicy. It's going to help with the formation of the crust on the outside, which again, just an awesome characteristic of a smoked brisket. But then it's also going to deliver a ton of flavor, which is the most important part of why we're doing this, right? Because why would we go through all this effort if we were just going to make a non-tasty brisket? What the hell's the point?
Tip for you. My hand is pulling up and way out of range, and I'm using the tip of the knife in the crevice, so my hand is always moving away from the knife, so I'm never putting myself downrange and at risk of being cut. Little pro tip for you. So now we're going to take our brisket and we're going to move it into something that I'm sure everybody else owns in their kitchen. And that is a brisket bucket. Now what is a brisket bucket, you might ask? Now, a brisket bucket is just any container you have in your house that'll fit a brisket. So that's a brisket bucket. Now what we're going to do in this thing is we're going to season it. So in order to do that, we got to make our spice mix. So let's trade these out.
And we keep it super simple, and we use an 8-to-1 ratio of coarse black pepper to kosher salt. We're going to apply a binder to the brisket. We use olive oil, and it's going to be about a tablespoon to a tablespoon and a half, and we're just going to spread it all over before generously applying an absolute butt ton of the spice mixture. Now we keep it inside of a giant spice container that we got a while back. And what we end up doing is that we'll marinate the briskets, and then whatever doesn't stick or adhere to the brisket, we'll put back into this giant spice blend thing, and then we'll pop it in the freezer for about 3 to 4 months, and then we'll just use that on briskets as we buy them before swapping it out and making a new one.
You already saw what we've done. We don't want to put all this effort to waste and have a subpar brisket, so go nuts with the black pepper. Now, you heard us call it the brisket bucket, so you might have figured it out by now. We're gonna leave it in here for a couple of hours, really let everything adhere to each other. We're gonna pop it in the fridge while we do that so that the olive oil can kind of work its magic and help bind everything to it. Before it touches the smoker, we're gonna give it about 3 or 4 hours. You could do it for 12, you could do it for 24. We've done it for 2 days. We didn't notice much of a difference after the 2-day mark, but you just wanna give it a little bit of a head start so it can get to know its seasoning. Which means gloves. Oh, gloves. Get that out of here. Then I'm gonna wash my hands, clean up the area, pop the lid on this thing, we're gonna throw it in the fridge.
Now for home use, we do use one of the self-regulating smokers, and we're just gonna pop it onto 225 and let that thing come up to temp.
It's 5 in the morning.
It's brisket time. It's 5 in the morning. To roll it, we're gonna get 2 large sheets of aluminum foil down. Before adding a little bit of stock, we have chicken stock here. And then we're going to commit barbecue treason to the Texans, and we're going to throw a bunch of brown sugar into this mix. And we know it's sacrilegious. We know it's not traditional Texan barbecue, but we're not making traditional Texas barbecue. We're making a Kenny style brisket. And the sweetness and the candy-like property it's going to add to the outside of the brisket throughout the remainder of the cooking process is going to be a nice little reprieve while eating the brisket, and it's also going to make it it's going to make it unique, right? Because it's going to add that savory and sweet sensation, which kind of like confuses your palate, but will draw you back in for more, especially when you add the nice warm and spicy sensations you're going to get from the black pepper. Overall, we think the eating experience this way is king. And now that we got our big baby dressed up in its aluminum foil, we're gonna pop it back in the smoker and we're gonna let it ride out the last 4 or 5 hours until it's ready to be served. Just, completely hands off again. And then once we bring it up to that 180 to 185 degree range, we're actually gonna pull it, drop it back into our brisket bucket. If you have a cooler or something, you can throw it in there, and we're gonna allow it to rest for 50 minutes to an hour before we even think about opening this bad boy up and carving it. And then after we wake it up from its little nap, we're actually going to cut it and separate it basically from where the point meets the flat, which is where the top meets the bottom. We're just going to saw that in half. And then we're going to reveal that this is an absolutely gorgeous smoked brisket. And then once we're done admiring it, we're going to give it a nice little rotation there, and we're going to cut it against the grain in about pencil thick slices. Now we're going to give it the flop test and crushed it. And then we're going to try to pull it apart, and it doesn't just immediately break on itself, which is good, so it's going to have a bite. If you're not familiar with cutting brisket or you don't know which direction is which, it's okay to cut off one slice and then take a look at things. When you're cutting with the grain, it's going to look like a substantially tougher piece of meat. Now, if this is your first brisket and you end up with some dud pieces, as in you did cut with the grain and they're tough and you don't know what to do with them, there's actually a recipe that we use for pop-up events that we think are going to be perfect to help you along with both giving you ideas of how to use your brisket and also showing you how to utilize it in ways that you probably wouldn't have thought earlier. So let's jump into making our barbecue smothered brisket burrito. On a 12-inch tortilla, we're going to drop down some of our rice, which people, will tell you don't double down on carbs in your burrito, but I'm not here for it, so you can tell them to go away. Then pile on your brisket scraps and add a little bit of whatever your favorite barbecue sauce is, whether it be homemade or store-bought, it's on you. Now to fold the burrito, we're going to start by pushing the edges in and then rolling the backside over the top of the filling to create a nice seal, by pulling that bit back and trying to stuff the filling into those corners. If you've got to stick a couple pieces back in there, that's fine. They're going to try to run out. We really overloaded this thing. And if you remember our cheesesteak egg roll recipe, you're going to be familiar with this part because we're going to pull the burrito towards ourselves and then push the back end towards the front to finish the roll. And then, boom, it's going to be a nice, tight sealed burrito. Then we're going to grab a sheet tray or sheet pan. We're going to get a little bit of the barbecue sauce down before putting the burrito down, just so that the burrito will not stick to the tray during the cooking process, because cleaning that up is going to be a pain in the butt. Then we come over the top with some shredded mozzarella cheese. And then we're going to blast it in the oven at 375 until the cheese is all nice and melted. Then once the cheese is melted, we're going to come over the top again with more barbecue sauce, as you'd imagine this time, to completely cover it edge to edge. Hence, where the smothered name comes from. Before popping it back in the oven for another, 4 or 5 minutes, just enough to get the actual barbecue sauce nice and hot and sticky and glazed to everything. Then we just finish this up the only way we know how. We're going to get it off the tray and onto a plate. And then we're going to come over the top of it with a little bit of our roasted garlic crema before hitting it with some nice, beautiful green, finely diced chives. And there you have it. That is one of our best-selling pop-up menu items. And it is worth every single calorie that is on that plate.